Hello and welcome to the Transfers Podcast, powered by footballtransfers.com, a new podcast where we bring you news, insight and analysis on that most important of the least important things, football. I'm Ronan Murphy and I'm joined today by Robin Bairner, and as you can see, it's a video podcast. Unless, of course, you're listening on your podcast app and then you can't see anything. So that introduction was a bit of a waste of time, but hello, Robin, anyway.
Hi, Ronan. It's good to be here, and it's great to see you for a change.
Yes, yeah. It's nice to see your lovely face. So obviously we have this podcast on your podcast apps where you can listen, but as well, we've been running it on YouTube with Duncan for a while now, but we've decided for 2025 we might try some video elements to it. And thanks to Mark, our lovely producer, working away in the background for these video elements. So if you want to tune in and have a look on YouTube, feel free, and you can see how gorgeous Robin and I look in reality. This week we're looking at your biggest clubs making moves in the market so far, and we look at some young players from Ligue and the Bundesliga, and to keep an eye on this month and over the next few months. So I suppose the biggest team that's done the most so far has been Man City, Robin. So yeah, it's been an interesting month so far for them, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We're not used to seeing Manchester City do too much in the January transfer window, but this month they've rather been forced into it due to their poor form in the Premier League and also the Champions League. Now, we're recording this prior to their match against Paris Saint-Germain, but obviously if they lose that, they face a very real prospect of being knocked out in Europe, which would be really quite incredible. And the response has been, quite an emphatic one from City. They've already moved to sign Khusanov from Lens, Omar Marmoush from Eintracht Frankfurt, and Vitor Reyes, a young centre-back from Palmeiras. And it looks like their spending in January could top 200 million euros, which would be an incredible investment for them. And as I said, it's one that's really quite unprecedented for City to make. And it's a real statement of intent in terms of, what they've done this season, in terms of how they've struggled, but also what they're looking to do going forward into the future.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, they had Erling Haaland obviously signing that 9.5-year deal or 115-month deal. I think people were pointing out that was 115, but yeah, signing that long deal. And I think Marmoush and Haaland up front, it gives them a different dimension. It gives them a plan B. They were too reliant maybe on Erling Haaland earlier in this season, and now they have a striker to come in to ease the burden on Erling Haaland, maybe play alongside him. You've seen Marmoush. Well, I've seen Marmoush play in a two in the Bundesliga, so I think he can work well with Haaland. I think they could be an interesting pairing. Gives Pep Guardiola a different dimension in attack, and it kind of indicates that this Man City, there mustn't be too worried about those 115 months ahead anyway, that they have brought in Erling Haaland, but this is a Man City team that they're not going to roll over for Liverpool or anyone else in the Premier League or anybody in the Champions League.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's almost an admission of that they've made a mistake in allowing Julian Alvarez to leave to Atletico Madrid in the summer, because, as you say, it looked like they didn't have a plan B when Haaland wasn't firing. And we've seen him so regularly score a goal a game, and he started the season so well. It looked like it was going to be another, incredible campaign for him. And, it is going to be another brilliant campaign on a personal note for Haaland, it looks like. But for City, it looks like it's going to be much more of a struggle. And as you mentioned, the 9.5-year contract is a huge statement of intent. It's a huge statement that, City look like they believe that they're in a good position to fend off these 115 charges, because Haaland, you would imagine, wouldn't be committing himself for nearly the next decade, the duration of his whole career effectively, to a City side that was going to be severely punished by the Premier League, you would have thought.
One of the players you mentioned obviously is Khusanov, and you've seen him play in Ligue 1, and I think kind of fans who maybe aren't aware aren't quite sure who he is, or perhaps maybe what he's going to bring, because he was kind of playing in lower divisions just a couple of years ago, and he's only a young guy. So what can you tell us about him?
Yeah, so Khusanov was signed by Lens for just €100,000. So that's nothing even for a team of Lens's standing. So for him to transform into a player worth 40 million euros over the course of effectively 18 months is really quite incredible. And he's not even been a first team regular at Lens for the duration of that time. It's really only been in the sort of last 6 months that he's broken into the first team. But I think Lens felt that he always had a huge potential. And, in the summer, there was all this talk about how he was going to be a breakout player. And that's really transpired. And, it's the hype has come from not only his teammates, but also Lens manager Will Still, who said that when Khusanov went to the Olympics with the Uzbekistan team, that he could represent Uzbekistan in almost any event. And the one event that he picked out in particular was a 100-meter sprint. So I think that kind of tells you that, his strength is sort of physical. He's exceptionally quick. He's been described by Brice Samba, the France international goalkeeper, as a beast. And Samba was saying in pre-season he was scared to go into challenges with Khusanov in training purely because, he was so fearful for his own safety. So this is a guy who is a really committed and physical defender, very quick, but also technically sound as well. So, he's a guy with a huge amount of potential and a large ceiling, and you can see him thriving in the Premier League.
Yeah, I think you mentioned as well, I'm looking forward to seeing Khusanov, obviously, but you mentioned as well Cambiaso could be another option, and he would be the player to bring that spending over 200 million for January, which is kind of unheard of these days. It used to be common enough that we would see teams spend a lot of money in January, but in recent years with PSR and FFP and stuff like that, you're not seeing the same amount of money being spent in the January window. But Man City obviously thrown that out of the window this month. But yeah, he's got an ETV of 29.7 million on football transfers, but he could cost City 60 million or more. Do you think this is a move that could happen, or how Juventus fans might kind of see this occurring?
Yeah, so Cambiaso is a player, you speak to people and he's a player described as versatile and clever. He's somebody who would fit very well into Pep Guardiola's sort of mindset as a manager, and he's extremely well thought of by Juventus fans. In fact, the Juventus fan that I was speaking to about his potential and about how good he was claimed that he was going to go on hunger strike if Cambiaso was sold, which might be taking it a little bit too far, but it certainly shows just how highly thought of he is by Juventus fans. And he's seen as a sort of cornerstone of Juventus going forward by their supporters. So I think it would be a huge blow for them as a club if they were forced to sell. And I think that's why we're looking at a fee of potentially 60 million euros when our ETV on Cambiaso was just about half that. So it's going to take a huge bid for City to sign him. But again, it would be a huge statement of intent as to what they are looking to do going forward if they were to get able to get this one over the line.
You mentioned earlier in the show that Man City playing PSG in the Champions League, and PSG have already spent lots of money to get a player from Italy this month. And yeah, do you think Kvaratskhelia is going to be a superstar, or the superstar that we think he could be at PSG, or how does it fit into the PSG's model? Because we've seen in the past them buying Messi and Neymar and top players, but they were kind of coming towards the end of their career. Is this kind of a change in tact where they're buying the best young talent in the world rather than kind of players who were once the best or are coming to the end of their careers?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, when PSG moved on from Messi and Neymar, this is a process that's been ongoing for maybe 18 months, 2 years. They've publicly stated it's the end of their sort of bling-bling era, is what President Nasser Al-Khelaifi called it. So, yeah, exactly. So, it's a move away from signing superstars, and it's an idea of trying to build their own superstars. So ideally, the players they want to sign are young and ideally French from the Paris region, because they want to build up this identity of the club as being a very Parisian club. And obviously, the Paris as a region is arguably the best in the world at producing young footballers. So there is tremendous scope for PSG to do this, and it's not an unrealistic goal for them to be able to do. However, when you've got somebody like Kvaratskhelia, who is a player they chased in the summer, Napoli wanted about 100 million for him at that point. PSG said no, and they've now revisited it. And I guess the Victor Osimhen scenario, which we've seen Napoli fail to sign Osimhen and ultimately being forced to shunt him out on loan, has had a role in this, because Kvaratskhelia does not want to follow Osimhen in terms of signing a new contract with the club and tying himself down to a big release fee and then not being able to move. So he's rejected Napoli's contract offer and instead has accepted a bigger offer from PSG. And he does seem to fit very nicely into what PSG are wanting. It points to Luis Enrique, I suppose, departing entirely from the modern trend of having a sort of big, burly number 9, the Haaland type figure, if you like. We're going to see PSG probably sell Randall Koulibaly and offload any sort of, centre forward. They'll have Gonzalo Ramos, but he'll be the only sort of focal point player, if you like, in the team. And that will free up Kvaratskhelia to play on the wing. I think it's quite an interesting one, because obviously this has cast some doubt on the future of Bradley Barcola, who has been linked to Premier League teams in the past, notably Chelsea. I think what's going to happen there is that you'll see potentially Barcola or Ousmane Dembele playing as a false 9. So I don't think PSG are necessarily going to have to sell anybody. It's just more about Luis Enrique not liking a centre forward and wanting the sort of free, versatile and quick, mobile, lithe attackers in his front line. So I think PSG are going to play in a very different style to many of the top teams at the moment, but it's a style that's very much in the form of Luis Enrique.
That sounds pretty interesting. It'll be intriguing to see how it works out for him. And obviously we've seen other teams and other coaches come in and try to impose a specific style on a team, and sometimes it hasn't worked out and sometimes it has worked out. And sometimes then when it hasn't worked out, the club are kind of left in a limbo where they've been trying one style and it doesn't necessarily fit. And you see Amorim coming into Manchester United and he's trying the 3 at the back and he's still persisting with it, and there's kind of doubts about it, and some people are saying he should stick with it and some people aren't. And then you see Hansi Flick at Barcelona, and the high line was utterly exposed against Benfica in the Champions League this week.
But it didn't matter.
Yeah, it didn't matter, and we've seen it against Real Madrid obviously before, and things like that. So yeah, it can be risky to make changes like this, and one of the risks that we've seen backfire, and I know all too well, is Borussia Dortmund. Nuri Sahin, he's without a job. He has come back from Bologna separate to the team, or the rumours he was coming back separate to the team because he was let go after Borussia Dortmund lost to Bologna in the Champions League. They had led and then they let the lead slip, but once they went level in the match, it looked like it was all over for them, because this is a team that has looked to have been falling apart for the last few weeks, and they haven't won at all yet. They've lost every single game in 2025 since the turn of the year, including matches that no Borussia Dortmund manager should ever see a defeat in, conceding 4 goals to teams like Holstein Kiel, who were never a Bundesliga team before this season. So yeah, Nuri Sahin is gone in Borussia Dortmund, and they're now looking to see who they're going to bring in for the rest of the season. They have the other 19 coaches stepped up to the weekend and we'll see what happens after that. But there's obviously been a lot of talk of Erik ten Hag around Borussia Dortmund because he's been there in recent weeks, and Matthias Sammer is a good friend of Ten Hag. They worked together at Bayern Munich when Sammer was director of football there, and Ten Hag was the reserves coach. But it looks like Ten Hag obviously wants a long-term deal, and Borussia Dortmund at the moment are looking to the summer. So I think despite all the rumours you're seeing around Erik ten Hag going to Borussia Dortmund at the moment, I'm not sure it's going to happen. Or Roger Smith, the former Benfica coach, I don't think he's going to take charge there. So what we might see is someone come in as an interim, and then in the summer we'll get a permanent manager, because someone like Sepp Hoeneß of Stuttgart has been linked. But in the meantime, there's still going to be a lot of things going on at Borussia Dortmund over the next few weeks. We've seen Daniel Malen leave. There's links of Karim Adeyemi leaving. Gio Reyna could be on the way out. He's been in. There's interest in him from Milan, obviously. They have to work out a fee and things like that. If it is Jamie Gittins, formerly Jamie Bino Gittins, he's been linked to teams in the Premier League. He's been linked to Bayern Munich even. So yeah, there's going to be lots of ins and outs in Dortmund over the next few weeks. It could be one of the busiest clubs between now and the end of the window. But the big talking point for many people outside of Germany, outside of Gio Reyna or Jamie Gittins or whoever, will be Marcus Rashford. And he's another one that you wonder, will he end up staying at Manchester United? Because Borussia Dortmund, are they going to pay this 10 million that they would need to pay to sign Marcus Rashford? And if Eric Ten Hag isn't the manager to come in to Borussia Dortmund, it's hard to see why they would, because for me, signing Marcus Rashford to Borussia Dortmund is a desperation move. He's not like someone that you would bring in on loan and then maybe make some money on him, or he's a young player you could help develop and you could use as an example. Why would Borussia Dortmund sign Marcus Rashford? That's kind of what I'm thinking every time they get linked to him, because he's not a player that they would buy full time. He's not a player they could afford full time. So he would be a very short term move. And unless they're that afraid that they're not going to make the top four in Germany this season, I can't see it happening. And I think Marcus Rashford's future is going to be an interesting one over the next few weeks, and I'm not going to be surprised if he ends up staying at Man United. Yeah,
I mean, I guess the big question about Rashford at the moment is, why would anybody sign him? I mean, this is a guy on a huge contract at Manchester United. None of the major European teams can seem to afford to sign him. So, I mean, there's interest from Barcelona. This is where Rashford apparently wants to go. But then you look at Barcelona's attacking line. We've just watched them destroy Benfica, score 5 against Benfica. They've destroyed Real Madrid already this year. Why do they need to risk spending so much money that they don't necessarily have? I know they're back to the 1-to-1 ratio now, but why risk that, signing a player like Rashford, who has effectively been out of form for so long now? It's been months since he's been anywhere near his best. So why are you signing him on loan for a big loan fee and also big wages when you potentially just don't need him? Would he even start for Barcelona at the moment? It just doesn't make sense for me. And for me, the whole Rashford saga is about who actually wants to sign him and who can afford to sign him. And I'm not sure there's any clubs there who fit these two criteria. It's going to be a really awkward one before the end of the January window.
Yeah, I think it will. And obviously PSG had been a team that had been long linked, and like you said earlier, their approach to buying players is totally different. Rashford doesn't really fit who they would sign, and now they definitely don't need him. They've signed someone better and younger for me.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I think the whole links between PSG and Rashford have never made sense, because they've always had somebody on the left wing, whether it's been Mbappe or Bradley Barcola, who has been a superior player or in better form. It's just not a deal that's ever made sense to me, and it's always struck me as being agent talk, and particularly now since PSG have moved past this supposed big spending era of signing superstars and have transitioned to signing younger players. Rashford's just not a player who made sense for me to go to PSG this January.
Yeah, and another French club that could have movers and shakers, I think, is Lyon. Ryan Cherki has been linked with half the Bundesliga, or the top end of the Bundesliga. Dortmund, like I mentioned, he's been one of the players that have linked there. Bayern Munich, Bayer Leverkusen. I don't actually see Munich or Leverkusen maybe coming in for him. Dortmund is definitely a possibility, with Daniel Malen already moved on, and maybe some other winger moving on this month. But yeah, do you think he is likely to leave, or is there sounds around Lyon that he is on the way out?
Yeah, there's certain potential for him to go. There's been talk about a gentleman's agreement of just over 20 million euros that would allow Cherki to go. And I think at this moment in time, for that sort of price, he would represent very good value. Now, Cherki's a player I've spoken about in the past, and I've raised doubts about him in the past because of his consistency more than anything. His talent's absolutely undoubted. For anybody who's not familiar with him, he's just such a wonderfully technically gifted player who is capable of, all sorts of tricks on the ball, brilliant passes, wonderfully creative and imaginative. At his best, he's a player that anybody in the world would want. But equally, at his worst, he's like playing with 10 men. However, since he has signed a new contract with Lyon and been invited back into the first team, this happened about September, October time, his form's been electric. It's perhaps been the best 2 or 3 months of his career. He's shown consistency. He's shown he is capable of being consistently decisive. And he's been a very important player for Lyon. And Lyon have this threat hanging over them of relegation. They're going to have to raise, I think it's something in the region of 145 million euros. And that might not be entirely correct, but it's a huge sum of money. And it looks like John Textor, who is their owner, is in the process of achieving a good deal of this. But equally, it does mean that Lyon will still have to sell 1 or 2 players. There was talk of a huge fire sale in the club earlier this year when these charges were initially brought against Lyon by French football's financial watchdog. It doesn't seem to be as desperate as a situation now as it once was, but equally, I still think we're going to have to see 2 or 3 more players move on, and Cherki is one of their most sellable assets. And for 20 million euros or around that fee, I think he would be an excellent pickup for a whole host of clubs. Anybody who's looking for a creative player, somebody to game break for them, I think he would be terrific for. And as Ronan mentioned, a whole bunch of Bundesliga teams have been interested in him. Liverpool have been interested in him too. I think he'd be a very interesting signing for Liverpool. Perhaps not the sort of typical consistent, what you're going to get from him for Liverpool, which is typically the player they like to sign. But I think he would be a really interesting and very exciting player for the Premier League and indeed for the Bundesliga.
Cool. He's definitely one to watch now for the moment. Obviously, teams that will have some money to spend in the Bundesliga as Eintracht Frankfurt over the next few weeks. But I wouldn't say necessarily we'll be looking at someone like him, but they are kind of showing the rest of the world how to make money, how to print money at the moment. Omar Marmoush is the latest mega exit. They've sold Colin Moani, who you mentioned at PSG, 95 million he was. Luki Jovic was 63 million to Real Madrid. Sebastian Haller was 15 million to West Ham in the last few years, and they've only kind of spent over 20 million a couple of times in their history. They are a team that has long known how to make money and print money. They even equaled Ruud Gullit's world record transfer fee back in 1988 for a Hungarian midfielder, Lehos Datari. They sold it to Olympiacos at the time for I think it was something like the equivalent of €6 million nowadays. So this is a team that have long printed money, but I think someone that could be worth keeping an eye on, and it's someone that you're probably familiar with as well, is Hugo Ekitike. They bought him in the summer after having him on loan from PSG. They only spent 16.5 million to activate his purchase option. He's got a contract at the club till 2029, which means that if they do sell him, it's going to cost a lot of money for any team to buy him. But he's after scoring in the last 2 games in a row in the Bundesliga, with the kind of future of Marmoush kind of up in the air at the time. He's stepped up. He's shown he can be their next kind of great forward there. He's a different sort of a player. Got 13 goals in 26 games this season already for Eintracht Frankfurt. I think he is going to be one to watch over the next few months and the next few kind of in the summer to see if teams will kind of follow suit and make another bid for a Frankfurt forward, because let's see how Omar Marmoush obviously gets on with Man City, but Ekitike is one to watch. I think he will be on the radar of many clubs this summer, but I think PSG will be sad that they lost him. But there's lots of other players in Ligue 1 that I think are worth keeping an eye on, and you might recommend to some of our listeners to watch over the next month and the next few months that could kind of be in the transfer market in the near or the short-term future.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll kick off this with Strasbourg. Now, Strasbourg are obviously very pertinent in Ligue 1 because of their link with Blueco, of course, Chelsea owners. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that they will sell to Chelsea, but it does indicate that there is a strong possibility that anybody who is thriving at Strasbourg has this route to Chelsea. And we may well see that with Mamadou Sarr, who was signed by Strasbourg in the summer, 19-year-old centre-back, and it looks like he is going to sign for Chelsea for something in the region of 12 to 13 million euros. It's a sort of deal that we should probably get used to, and anybody who's thriving at Strasbourg is probably going to be on the radar of Chelsea. And we've obviously seen Chelsea in the need of a striker. Dutch-Nigerian striker Emmanuel Omega has 4 goals in 4 games for Strasbourg. Perhaps not an option necessarily this January because of a perhaps slight lack of quality. But you can imagine if he continues to score at this rate, Chelsea might just take a punt on him to be maybe a second or third choice striker behind Nicholas Jackson. Let's see. I think that would be an interesting one to watch if he continues to score. Perhaps a more reasonable shout immediately would be Swedish winger Sebastian Nanansi, who was signed by Strasbourg from Molde in the summer and has really lit up Ligue 1 since then. Again, this is an area where Chelsea are well stocked, so not necessarily something you would expect to see, but if they're struggling for numbers in their squad by the end of the January window, it's not something we should rule out. Obviously, the other major French team who, like you mentioned, Frankfurt printing money. Monaco have got a habit of printing money as well, which is quite fitting given their status as a principality. And, one of the
home of
richest...
Formula One, every Formula One driver. Every Formula One driver
exactly.
lives there.
There's a reason for that as well. We're just coming off Monaco beating Aston Villa in the Champions League 1-0. They've obviously beaten Barcelona in the Champions League already this season. So they're a very, very capable team, and they've got a lot of young players, a lot of young talent there. Wilfried Singo, their centre-back, who can also play right-back, is a player that I know many Paris Saint-Germain fans would love to see hook up with them. You can imagine his versatility and his quality would attract a lot of Premier League teams as well. He's been outstanding this season. Further forward, I guess you've got to look at Magnus Akliush, their exciting winger. He played well against Aston Villa last night and scored against Barcelona. Another very exciting player who would fit into a lot of top European teams. I guess he's maybe more profiled towards the Bundesliga, whose clubs have had such success signing from Ligue 1 in the past. It wouldn't surprise me to see him move on. And Elise Ben Seguir, another attacking midfielder who's packed with quality. His development has been delayed by a serious knee injury, but he's come back from that and is another player who's playing very well. Elsewhere, I think you've got to look at Ayoub Badawi, who absolutely shone against Real Madrid on his birthday in the Champions League earlier this season. He plays for Lille. What
birthday did he have?
Sorry.
What birthday did he have?
I think it was his 18th birthday, but don't quote me on that. Another hugely talented young player, and one who could move on this January, who's perhaps the most pertinent in this discussion, is Marseille striker Eli Wahi, who it's not really worked out for him over the course of the last 18 months. He moved to Lens for big money from Montpellier, subsequently moved to Marseille from Lens this summer. It's not really happened for him, but he has got huge talent, and I know he's been linked with a number of Premier League clubs. West Ham, I believe, is one of the teams interested in him. And he would be another interesting signing, because if you can get him up and running, he will be a fantastic player, but currently injured at the moment, so that could be a tricky one. But it wouldn't surprise me to see somebody take a punt on Wahi this month.
Yeah, he is one of the players that has been linked to as an Omar Marmoush replacement for Eintracht Frankfurt as well, but there has been some kind of hit back or kind of an undercurrent of disappointment from some Frankfurt fans who have exposed kind of some seedier elements.
It's an interesting choice of words.
Yeah. See your elements of his past. So it will be interesting to see if he does go somewhere, how fans will react to it, or if there is a strong link, how fans will react. And that is the case, unfortunately, with plenty of players around the world. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see who Frankfurt do sign as their next striker, like I mentioned earlier. But one move that's already happened of a young player in the Bundesliga is Tom Bischoff. He's agreed to move from Hoffenheim to Bayern Munich. He's been kind of touted as the best young midfielder in Germany, the next kind of upcoming young attacking midfielder. He has the second most chances created in the top 5 leagues in Europe by a teenager, only behind Lamine Yamal of Barcelona. So he is someone that it will be worth keeping an eye on, but in the Bundesliga over the next few weeks and months. But he's already moved, and it'll be interesting to see whether he's be able to step into that Bayern Munich team immediately, because he had been linked with RB Leipzig, and you felt that would be a better move for a young player. Leipzig seems to be the perfect stepping stone. Like Robin mentioned, that Monaco seems to be a great nurturing centre for these young players. Leipzig tends to be in the Bundesliga, and we're kind of seeing that again this season. Xavi Simons, that's someone that you're also familiar with because he's on loan at Leipzig again from PSG. It'd be interesting to see what happens with him in the next few months, because he was injured for Leipzig. Leipzig looked a different team without him, but now that he's back, they kind of look reborn again. He's a player capable of making the difference in any game. He's been linked with the likes of Manchester United and Arsenal. He's going to be definitely one to watch. But do you think there's any chance that maybe PSG might decide to keep him around next summer?
Well, I think PSG would love to keep him around. I think it's just whether they can keep Xavi Simons happy. And it's funny because he's a player that, as I say, PSG would love, but there seems to be some issue in the background there that's not entirely been revealed as to why Xavi Simons has insisted on going back to Leipzig, and by the looks of it will insist on a move this summer. PSG will make a huge profit out of it, but again, it would be, you mentioned Hugo Ekitike earlier, it would be a huge disappointment if PSG were to lose such a talented young player, particularly given the way their project has kind of shifted. And he's the sort of exciting, creative player that they would love to have in their team. So, I think PSG could well be forced to sell, but it would be driven by Xavi Simons rather than the club's desire.
Yeah, he seems to be a kind of player that knows where he wants to be in his career. At the moment, it's Leipzig and it's working out well for him, but you would imagine that this is a stepping stone for him. He sees himself the same way Dani Olmo saw himself last season at Leipzig, that it was a stepping stone and he would be going to Barcelona. This is kind of the same that Xavi Simons seems to see himself as someone who is ready to make the next step and will make the next step. So of the players that could move for 60 million or more in the summer, he seems to be one of the most likely to move. So he will be worth keeping an eye on. Other players in the Bundesliga that will command mega money are Florian Wirtz and Jamal Musiala. And they are players that are kind of at the top level of the game already, even though they're just young players. Wirtz, he seems to be committed to Bayer Leverkusen for the moment. As long as Xabi Alonso remains there, they seem to be getting on quite well. But you can never say never with him, because there's so many teams interested, and Leverkusen aren't a team that are in a position to turn down a bid of 80 million or more from anybody. So you definitely want to keep an eye on. He won't move in January, obviously, but he's one to keep an eye on in the summer. Jamal Musiala, I can't see him. He's the best. Him and Wirtz are the best young talents in the Bundesliga, but he is not going to move from Bayern Munich. Bayern Munich never need to sell, unlike Bayer Leverkusen. They don't need to turn around and say, we need this 80 million or we need this 100 million. We'll just keep him forever. He will be. So if you hear Jamal Musiala being linked to your club, just ignore the rumours. Bayern Munich aren't going to sell him. He's going to be the next Thomas Muller for Bayern Munich. He's going to be there forever.
He's been linked to Barcelona today by Sport, but apparently Barcelona need to offload Frankie de Jong to make way for Musiala's wages. So, as you say, de Jong's not wanting to leave Barcelona, so that's just not on the cards at the moment.
Yeah, I think De Jong is one of those players that'll always get linked with a move away, but never actually be there. And we'll turn around in the year 2040, and De Jong will still be being linked with a move away from Barcelona. He's another one of those. Someone who could leave Bayern Munich though is Matthias Tell. He's not getting the game time he wants. He's not getting the game time he deserves. He obviously is a wonderful talent, but he's still very raw, and Vincent Kompany doesn't fully trust him yet, and he wasn't fully trusted by Thomas Tuchel, especially wasn't trusted by Tuchel. Company's given him a bit more trust, so he is someone who's been linked with Chelsea in that Nkunku swap deal. That seems very unlikely to happen, but Tell has been told he will stay at Bayern Munich this month. Max Eberl, the man who's over the transfers at Bayern Munich at the moment, he said that there's no interest in a January exit for Matthias Tell, so don't expect him to move in January, but he is one to keep an eye on in the summer, because if between now and the end of the season he doesn't get the game time he wants, he will want to leave. And Bayern Munich, although I said they're not a selling club, and if players, they want to keep the best players at the club, if players aren't playing, they are only too happy to let them go at the right amount. We've seen them at Manchester United, how they sold Mazraoui and the Ligue to Manchester United, two players who probably will be good players and good squad additions and even good starters for Bayern Munich. But these were players that wanted to leave, and they were happy to let them go as they thought they had someone equivalent or better already at the club, or they could bring them in. So yeah, Matthias Tell is one to keep an eye on. Another one in the Bundesliga that we've kind of looked at in football transfers this week is Hugo Larsson. Steve Kay, our transfers correspondent, he had said that Arsenal are very interested in him, and it's not really a surprise. He's a very kind of commanding player for his age. He's still only 20, and he is a player that Frankfurt, if the right bid comes in, like it has with Marmoush and Kolo Muani and every other player that we listed earlier in the show, if a suitable offer came in, they would let him leave, because Frankfurt aren't in a position, as every other Bundesliga team apart from Bayern Munich, they aren't in a position to turn down big offers for their best players, because like you said, Robin, there's always younger and other players out there. There are players that Bundesliga clubs will have looked at in Ligue 1 that they like the look of and that they could give a chance on and turn into money coming down the line further. So he is one to Hugo Larsson is one to keep an eye on. He is very much potentially a January transfer or a summer transfer. I would expect him to move in 2025. He is one to watch for over the next few months. So it could be very busy for outgoings in the Bundesliga, obviously with Borussia Dortmund maybe having a fire sale to pay for Marcus Rashford. But yeah, it could be a very busy final few weeks in the Bundesliga, which is exactly what we want on the Transfers podcast.
It looks like it's going to be a very busy week, busy conclusion to the transfer window anywhere. I think I don't think anybody would have predicted at the start of January it would have been quite such an exciting window with so much going on. It's been really, really exciting.
Yeah, do you think the revamped Champions League might play some part in that? Because teams are now kind of active in Europe and are active in Europe until the end of January, knowing what might lay ahead.
Yeah, I mean, potentially, but equally, any signings that they make just now aren't eligible to play in the Champions League at the moment, or indeed the Europa League. So they do have this more packed fixture schedule, I guess, and we've seen so many players speak out about it, and perhaps making additional signings at this point of the season is a way to alleviate any fatigue in the squad and to ensure your squad against any injuries going forward.
Yeah, I think that's why you might see Borussia Dortmund be busy in the last few weeks, regardless of who's the man in the dugout for the job, because they need to improve that squad. Nuri Sahin's small squad didn't work out for them, so they need to bring in some new players. They've already let a player go in January with Malen leaving for Aston Villa, much to be annoying Villa fans saying he will be a frustrating figure. We haven't seen him yet, but we will pretty soon, and we'll see whether that comes true or not. I think he can be a brilliant player on his day, and he can be a terrible player on a different day. So he's just one of those players. But Borussia Dortmund are a team, expect them to spend money on new wingers, maybe new defender, maybe new midfielder. Could be busy if they want to back this new manager and get them back into the top four in Germany, because they are a mid-table team at the moment, and they look like a mid-table team. And Borussia Dortmund cannot be a mid-table team, so expect them to be busy coming in and going out in the next few weeks. So we'll definitely be keeping a track of it on the Transfers podcast and on Football Transfers. That's us for this week. And again, I hope you enjoy any visuals. And if you're listening on an audio device, pop onto YouTube and see what you think. But overall, thanks very much. You've been listening to and watching the Transfers podcast, powered by footballtransfers.com. If you liked what you heard, please follow us on your favorite podcast platform and give us a rating or a review. Your support helps us build a bigger audience and bring you more news, analysis, and insight. You can also follow messages on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and Blue Sky, and the likes of it, at Transfers Podcast. Our Twitter address is TransfersCast. That's also the one on Blue Sky, TransfersCast as well. Robin is at Bairner, and I'm at Swearing Paul. Our production is by Mark Caulfield, a Pro Podcast production. Stay safe, be well, and thank you for listening.
He did the transfer window. Ian McGarry, who left us and was alone for a couple of years. Duncan was old. Now he's back with a new show. It's called The Transfers. It's where everyone's gonna go. The transfers, the transfers, the transfers. Where everyone's gonna go. Where everyone's gonna go. The transfers, the transfers, the transfers. Where everyone's gonna go. 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 Where everyone's gonna go.